This story takes place approximately 7 years ago, and to fully understand it, some background information is necessary. After graduating from high school, I found myself unable to afford college, so I took on a job as a certified nursing assistant (CNA) at a nursing home. It was a challenging job, to say the least. I endured about 8 months in that environment before I decided to switch to a healthcare agency, where I could have more flexibility in my schedule and provide home care to patients. Most of the individuals I cared for through the agency required temporary home health aides while they recovered from surgeries or illnesses. In some cases, their insurance only covered a few hours a day, despite the fact that they needed much more assistance. After several months, the agency contacted me about a patient named Gary who was disabled and approved for 9 hours of daily care. She was considered a permanent case, with state representatives evaluating and authorizing the continuation of home services twice a year. I ended up working with Jerry for about 2 years through the agency. She was a genuinely kind woman, and despite the generational gap between us, we got along splendidly. Jerry had a sister named Nancy, who proudly advocated for both Jerry and her profoundly handicapped daughter, Jessica. I always admired Nancy because she had been dealt a difficult hand, having to care for both her sister and her daughter, who was unable to look after herself. We resided in New York State, and the state had recently introduced the CDPAP, Consumer-Directed Personal Assistance Program, which allowed families to appoint caregivers of their choice. The chosen caregivers would then select a healthcare agency to process their paychecks. The program was advantageous as it granted families more control over the care they received, and importantly, it offered financial compensation for taking care of their own family members. However, there were certain limitations. For instance, you couldn't receive payment for caring for your own child. It had to be a sibling or another form of relationship. Nancy held me in high regard, and when she asked if I would be willing to work with both Jerry and Jessica under this program, I enthusiastically agreed. At the time, Jerry and Jessica lived in different places, but the family managed to secure Section 8 vouchers and move them into the same apartment building, enabling the aides to work split shifts. Between the hours allocated to Jerry and Jessica, I found myself working a minimum of 40 hours per week. However, circumstances began to change. Nancy discovered a flaw in the program that allowed her to get paid for doing very little. The program operated on the basis of approved hours for the patient, and all that was required was to fill out weekly timesheets, print a schedule for the caregivers, and submit them to the agency responsible for processing the paychecks. There was no concrete way to prove that someone was actually providing the care. Initially, Nancy began filling out timesheets for herself whenever there were leftover hours at the end of the week, hours during which no one was actually working. She could only claim these hours for Jerry, so she would complete a timesheet for her son, indicating that he had been assisting Jessica during those unutilized hours. Although her son did offer occasional help, it was not for the full extent of the hours she was claiming. Eventually, Nancy's greed took over, and she began deliberately stealing hours from me and the other aides. Her actions became so egregious that she pushed us out by refusing to schedule us. This was a devastating blow for me, as I was already struggling financially at the time. I was working hard to take a few community college classes and make ends meet since my parents couldn't afford to send me to college. Finding another patient was not an easy solution due to the Medicaid cuts that had been implemented. I was still technically employed at my previous agency, but their offices had no available work due to the lack of opportunities. Now, let's talk about revenge. The moment I realized what Nancy was doing, I started taking pictures of the weekly schedules and everyone's timesheets. After I stopped working for her, I promptly reached out to the Attorney General's Medicaid fraud unit and reported her actions. I narrated the entire story, providing all the necessary details. Initially, I didn't receive any updates and remained in the dark. However, sometime later, an investigator contacted me, expressing interest in my case. I provided them with all the requested information, including copies of schedules and timesheets that clearly demonstrated Nancy's fraudulent behavior. To strengthen my claims, I also had another aide who was willing to serve as a witness. Several months passed without any significant developments, and eventually I received a call stating that the CDPAP program fell into a gray area for them, making it difficult to take legal action. Feeling discouraged, I decided to let the matter go and moved on with my life, forgetting about the whole ordeal. Then, almost 2 years ago, out of the blue, I received a call from the Attorney General's office. It turned out that my case had been reassigned to another investigator, and they wanted to meet with me to discuss additional evidence. It had been over 3 years since I initially lodged the complaint, so some of the smaller details had faded from memory. As it turns out, the investigators had spent the past few years meticulously building a case against Nancy and her family, and they were now nearing the point of going to court. To my surprise, they had amassed a significant amount of evidence. It came to light that Nancy had forged my signature on timesheets, fraudulently attributing hours I had worked with Jerry to Jessica, allowing her to claim all the hours for Jerry's care. Furthermore, she had been completing timesheets for her son, even though he wasn't providing any services as he was away at college in a different state. Nancy was essentially pocketing all the money for herself. Shortly after these revelations, I relocated across the country, completely forgetting about the situation. However, just last week, I randomly decided to Google Nancy's name and was taken aback when I stumbled upon a news article. It turned out that Nancy and her son had been arrested a year ago and were facing multiple felony charges each. Nancy must have struck a plea deal because she pleaded guilty earlier this year to one of the felonies, leading to an order to repay over $100,000 that she had stolen from the state. In addition, she received a 5-year probationary period. The local news covered the story extensively, and now, when you search her name online, which I've changed for the purpose of this story, it's the first thing that pops up. This may seem shady, but all is fair in love and divorce, declared my lawyer with a hint of cynical amusement. Those words resonated deeply as I found myself entangled in a tumultuous web of infidelity and betrayal. My ex-husband, a military man deployed in Europe, had repeatedly cheated on me while hurling baseless accusations of my own alleged unfaithfulness. Despite my steadfast commitment to the marriage, he seemed determined to sabotage our relationship. Reluctantly, I chose to remain in the United States to avoid extending his European tour, which he vehemently despised. Little did I know that his return from deployment would mark the beginning of an even darker chapter. With nearly 6 months of silence between us, he suddenly reappeared, expressing a desire to reconcile. Naively, I welcomed his plea, oblivious to the web of deceit surrounding his intention. It wasn't until a routine OB appointment a month later that I received a devastating revelation. I had contracted chlamydia. The truth hit me like a tidal wave. My faithfulness had been rewarded with an unforgivable betrayal. Yet, true to form, he vehemently denied any wrongdoing and accused me of infidelity in a desperate attempt to shift blame. Stranded 2,000 miles away from my family, I found myself at a crossroads contemplating my escape from this nightmarish mess. As if adding insult to injury, my ex-husband spiraled into alcoholism and became increasingly abusive. Despite the military police arresting him 3 times for domestic issues, the military's indifference left me in a precarious situation. They refused to keep him in the barracks, forcing me to allow him back home, all while he callously drained our account, leaving our child's basic needs unmet. Trapped in this dire predicament, I faced the grim reality that I lacked the financial means to start anew. Resolute in my determination to break free, I began meticulously devising a plan for the most feasible escape. Coincidentally, my ex-husband expressed interest in re-enlisting, which presented an unexpected opportunity. Seizing the chance, I suggested a military base near my family, a lifeline I could turn to if the journey ahead became arduous. With every detail carefully arranged, we swiftly packed our belongings and embarked on a journey that held both hope and trepidation. I confided in my parents, ensuring they were aware of my situation and ready to support me should the need arise. Though uncertainty loomed, I clung to the belief that somewhere beyond the chaos, a brighter future awaited, one where I could rebuild my life on my own terms. As soon as we settled into our new location, an opportunity presented itself, a defining moment in my escape plan. My ex-husband spiraled into an alcohol-induced frenzy, reaching a breaking point In a desperate act, he threatened to take his own life, prompting me to contact the suicide hotline for immediate intervention. The military police swiftly arrived, apprehending him and transporting him to a psychiatric ward for evaluation and treatment. In the wake of this incident, he claimed to have changed and expressed a desire to return home. However, I remained resolute, deliberately delaying his return. The military, recognizing his recurring substance abuse issues, intervened and sent him to a rehabilitation facility. It was during his absence that he began to grasp the true intention behind my suggestion of that particular military base, an escape route cunningly concealed. Realizing he had fallen into my calculated trap, his guard should have been raised. It should have dawned on him that I had initiated the meticulous planning required to sever our ties permanently. To streamline the divorce process, I enlisted the services of a lawyer to draft the necessary paperwork. While I initially filed it myself, I soon recognized the importance of professional assistance when engaging in less conventional strategies. In the state of Texas, where I reside, there exists a provision allowing one party to waive their rights to contest the divorce, effectively relinquishing all claims and absolving them of any notice regarding court proceedings. Armed with this knowledge, I requested my lawyer to draft a waiver, tailoring it to my needs. I handed the documents to my ex-husband, who, without reading them or seeking legal advice, signed them, seemingly oblivious to the implications. His negligence provided me with a significant advantage. Silently, I proceeded with the divorce proceedings, maintaining a facade of normalcy and emphasizing the procedural nature of the documentation. With caution, I drove to the clerk's office and filed the paperwork, solidifying the foundation of my liberation. The final court date arrived unbeknownst to my ex-husband, who had inadvertently surrendered his rights through his own carelessness. A brief conversation with the judge concluded the proceedings, and I promptly filed the final paperwork. As a courtesy, I dropped off a copy of the divorce decree at my ex-husband's workplace, having informed him beforehand about the impending paperwork. To say that he was caught off guard would be an understatement. He erupted in disbelief, unable to comprehend that the process had been finalized without his input. Just a week prior, he had expressed a desire to reconcile, unaware that I was already aware of the impending court date. Why engage in an argument when the conclusion was already imminent? The final words he uttered regarding our divorce revolved around his incredulity at my cunning maneuvering. In his eyes, I had revealed myself to be a devious and astute adversary. As a cautionary tale, remember this. Never resort to violence or mistreat your partner, for she may possess a resourcefulness and intelligence that surpasses your own. Last year, an interesting incident unfolded in my workplace. A shipping company. The intricate process involved the arrival of boxes from shipping containers, their scanning into the system, and their placement onto a network of conveyor belts. Subsequently, the boxes made their way down the belts to a line of diligent workers tasked with unloading them from the conveyor belts and loading them onto delivery trucks. I held a unique position at the end of one of these conveyor belts. My responsibilities encompassed not only loading my own delivery trucks, but also retrieving the boxes overlooked by others further up the belt. These neglected parcels were set aside in a special cart, waiting to be reintegrated into the system later on. At the beginning of each shift, we also received the boxes that drivers were unable to deliver, which were then placed on the belt for me to handle. Since I occupied the very end of this extensive process, we had sufficient time to handle these unattended packages before new ones arrived. Hence, I could ensure the proper attention was given to these missed deliveries before fresh boxes reached my workstation. However, things took an unexpected turn when my shift was pushed back by 10 minutes. Management, aiming to reduce costs, decided to delay my start time. Their rationale was that it took approximately 10 minutes for the new boxes to exit the shipping containers before they reached my position. Given their reasoning and the fact that the system logged my actual start time, which determined when I would be paid, I made a conscious decision to wait an additional 10 minutes before commencing my work. Although I informed my belt supervisor of my intentions, I knew there was little they could do since they had no say in altering my start time. Consequently, when the shift commenced, A substantial number of packages began accumulating at the end of the belt. These parcels were often burdensome, housed in deteriorating boxes, abandoned by drivers who preferred not to handle them. To resolve this predicament, my supervisor had to assign someone else who was already on the clock to address these packages, an inconvenience that bothered them. Similarly, the individual responsible for moving the special cart and reintegrating the boxes into the system grew frustrated because it was not readily available 10 minutes after the shift began, as they had become accustomed to. Naturally, I found myself irritated by this mounting pileup of boxes, which delayed my ability to handle the new arrivals coming down the belt. Furthermore, my supervisor became increasingly exasperated as this predicament distracted them from other aspects of their job until it was resolved. Even the managers were frustrated because I spent 10 minutes idling before finally resolving the ensuing chaos. This continued for approximately 2 weeks, until I noticed that my start time had been readjusted to align with everyone else's.